to this computer. So hello everybody. This is the pests and disease portion of the short course. Today we're going to be talking about the honeybee pests and diseases. If you haven't already, there's three other lectures and some reading that really should be done before then. So if this is your first of the short course, there's going to be a lot of jargon used because I'm assuming you've already been to and listen and worked through the equipment class, and that's just a really important assumed knowledge that I'm working and building off of which I'm building. So the agenda today, we are mostly talking about the parasitic mite, the varroa mite. We're going to be talking about how it grows in the hive and its seasonal functionality and what the seasons really look like as far as how the mites are building up. We're going to talk about monitoring those, varroa mites. And, sorry, but not listed here. We're also going to go and we're going to review some treatment options for the varroa mites with an emphasis on these are not all the treatments. They're simply 2 or 3 that I'm presenting. And here's the resources for the other tools that could be inside of your toolkit. We're going to briefly touch upon the brood diseases because 95% of the issues that you are facing as a beekeeper are the parasitic mites, the varroa mites. So we're going to touch upon it, but we're really going to be focusing on the varroa mites. Varroa mites are one of 2 parasitic mites that are inside of the hive. This is the first and the last time, really, I'm going to talk about tracheal mites. They're largely a non-issue in the United States as breeders have been able to breed in resilience and resistance to these mites. They hide inside of the breathing tubes of adults and then make winter survival hard to happen. So this is a photo taken from the book and how they kind of lodge themselves into the breathing tubes. There's still treatment and medications that exist out there that are being sold out there for tracheal mites. And so the reason why I'm bringing it up is there's just needs to be a sense of caution. They're largely a non-issue. Don't think that, but also don't think that somebody's not going to try to sell you a tracheal mite treatment. Make sure that the issue that you have are varroa mites, even though many people are not going to know about tracheal mites and just say mites. So from here on out, tracheal mites are not mentioned. And when I say mites, I mean varroa mites. If I say varroa mites, I mean varroa mites. If I say varroa, I mean varroa mites.
Hey, Patrick?
Yes?
Oh, sorry, just a quick question about the picture. The white, what's the white that we're looking at? I see you have the mite circled.
Yep, that's an open pupa.
Oh, that's an open pupa. Okay.
Yep.
So that's not in the adult bee, right? That's
not in the adult bee.
Okay.
So this was some cells between the cappings of between 2 boxes, and I opened up the hive, ripped open those cells, and exposed the metamorphosizing of honeybee. We're gonna touch upon that in a moment.
Okay, thank you.
So that white pupa that you saw is this pupa. I busted open the boxes and it exposed to that. So you were seeing the pupa stage. I'm gonna X that. Hopefully it doesn't mess things up. Very good. And that photo is important because that's where the varroa mites reproduce. They reproduce underneath cappings. So this here is a capping. This is a cross section of a cell. As that bee is metamorphosizing into the adult stage, that varroa mite is reproducing. Certain times a year, there could be as many as 4 adults underneath cappings and reproducing as there are on the bees themselves. So we're going to be talking about how there's depending on the time of year, there's many more varroa mites in a hive than what certain samples could actually be indicating. Here is that chart that we had in, I believe, the first class, and where it really comes to be important is this third section where you see that there's much more worker brood inside of the hive, and the workers are metamorphosizing for 12 days, whereas drones are metamorphosizing for 14 and a half days. So that varroa mite is able to reproduce one more time inside of a drone cell versus inside of a worker cell because of that addition of 2.5 days. So is just one of the treatment options that are popularly talked about is the removal of drones from a colony, and that's the logic behind it, because they're reproducing more inside drones cells versus worker cells. I personally don't do that because drones are an asset to the beekeeping community. If you're buying a nucleus colony from me, consider yourself inside of a 100-year breeding program. We don't have a silver bullet now, but we're constantly monitoring. We're constantly replacing queens that aren't doing well to better our stock, better our culling the poor performers and replacing them with individuals that might be doing a little bit better. The removal of drone cells kind of inhibits that kind of management. So varroa mites, I talked a little bit about the sampling. What does sampling, how to sample is the question. So you see this red circle here, there's that brown shiny dot there, that is a varroa mite on the back of that individual bee. I was extremely unlikely to see that. If I'm seeing if I'm seeing varroa mites on the backs of bees, I have a major issue on my hands, as most of the varroa mites are on the underside of the honeybee. So this is a very, very rare case. You can go your entire beekeeping career and not see that, but I was able to see it. And so how do you know what percentage of adult bees have varroa mites on them? The way is explained best by Mr. Tim Schuler, our former state apiarist. Oh. Sorry, this is an ad for mud water. Tastes like garbage. So here we're going to talk about, I'm going to allow Tim Schuler to talk about the sampling of varroa mites with an alcohol wash. This video was taken in 2015, so there is some things that he says there that I think even him would disagree with which he would disagree now. And so I'm going to pause and we're going to talk about exactly what we're looking at.
I'm not sure if it's just me, but I can't see, I only see the PowerPoint. I don't see YouTube. I don't know if that's just me.
It might very well not just
It's
be.
me
Yeah,
too.
same here. Same here.
Okay. All right. Thank you
Awesome.
for.
And there was no sound either, just so you know.
Okay. Now, can you see him?
We can.
Yep.
You can see. Is he talking? You can throw it in the chat if you're paused.
It looks like the video is paused to me.
Okay.
Yeah, but we can't, there's no sound. If you want to put the link, Patrick, in the chat, then we could view it separately and
Okay. Yeah. So. All right. So what he does here is he goes through the hive. He opens it up. Finds a frame with open brood, meaning a frame with not capped over larva. That metamorphosizing stage, and he shakes it into a bin, and then takes it, shakes it into a bin, takes a half a cup measurer, and has the alcohol in these little mason jars. The varroa mites fall off of the bees because he agitates and he shakes the alcohol. Also, the alcohol repels the varroa mites off the bees. And then you have, you pour out the alcohol and the varroa mites into another mason jar, and you're able to count the number of varroa mites per sample. I'm going to go back to my PowerPoint. So sorry about that. My test run, I thought it worked, but it didn't, I guess. If somebody can please put into the chat that if you are looking at the PowerPoint now, and that's all squared away. Okay, good. All right, so that sampling, that video, I will post, I'll send an email out to all those individuals that are here. At the end of this talk, I will copy and paste that link when I'm taking questions, and I will put it into the chat for your watching later. I'm sampling my hives about 6 times a year, sometimes even more often. You as a new beekeeper, sample your hives every time you go into them, and you are it's the equivalent of taking a blood test and understanding if you have an issue or you don't have an issue. So there's a couple questions here. So especially you're killing larvae. No, you're killing adult bees, not larvae. So you want to take a frame that has predominantly opened larva, open brood. This would be capped brood because there's the capping there. The reason for that is the varroa mites are looking for open larvae to go into, so that they eventually get capped over and then they can reproduce. So you're killing about 300 adult honeybees every time you sample. That's an invaluable amount of information that you are getting when you sample. So back to our handy dandy flow chart throughout the season. I think I touched upon it when we were finishing this talk about the seasonal life cycle of the honeybee. And we're really going to tie in about when to and how to treat using the knowledge and information that's in this flow chart for the different treatment options that we have. Circled in red are 2 times of year that are the effectiveness of many of the chemicals that you're using are, well, most effective. So to exploit the early season, the spring buildup, this time now, I'm treating all my colonies so that they're good and healthy come springtime. And in late springtime, I'm sampling all of my colonies to make sure that they've come out of winter good and strong and healthy. And then the second time of year, super vital for varroa management, is late summer. And so to, prepare for winter. There's loads of viruses that are associated with mites, much like deer ticks are associated and Lyme disease are associated with each other. If you have a high summer varroa mite population inside of your colonies and you treat in the fall, you can go into winter with very few varroa mites, but the viruses that are associated with them are and have affected your bees. So that's the late summer, just after your honey harvest, is a key time that I'm thinking about my bees and my varroa mites. So here's a buildup chart. In the yellow is a histogram in the way that it's representing the honeybee population. Coming out of winter, it starts to build up. So we're here right now with the population of my bees starting to grow. Let's say I were to sample my colonies right now. I might find a 1 mite per 300 bees, so a 0.33% infestation. As my spring builds up, as spring goes on and my bees build up, that varroa mite population, now that they're building up, there's a lot of brood for them to parasitize. So they're building up also. And about April 1st is about when we'll see this 2 here. This 2 is really what I'm looking for when I'm sampling in early spring. I'm making sure that 2 very quickly can turn into a 3, 7, 12 come late summer, when the amount of brood in the hive, because in late summer they start to not have so much brood in the hive and the population starts to decrease a little bit. That makes the ratio of varroa mites per adult bees become a little bit more emphasized, on the sense that there's more varroa mites now can't find brood to parasitize, so you're finding more in your alcohol wash. And then this is a hive, let's say, that isn't treated whatsoever, and going into late fall, going into winter, you're getting numbers completely out of control. You're finding 30 varroa mites per 300. You very likely will not see that because they're probably dead at that time. This is an extreme case of your bees probably, probably are not making it through the winter. I think in the next slide, I changed that at 50% of dying over winter to 80% because it's much more the case that your bees are probably not going to make it. So here I say, as a first-year beekeeper, test your hives once a month. And when you get your nucleus colony, wait a week. The second time you go into your hive, sample them. Do it. The first field day, we will be doing alcohol washes on my bees here, and I want people to be involved with that. So to understand and get comfortable with that piece of management. I'm testing 6 times a year. I'm testing once in this circle time, this first circle, and 3 times during this black circle, and once in late winter or late fall as needed there. So what can a person do? Most of the information that we're going to be discussing here, nearly all of the charts are pulled directly from the Bee Informed Partnership source resources for mite management PDF. If you go onto my website under education, you'll see resources for the new beekeeper. Under other reading, you'll find this document that I'm going to be referencing often. It's a document that I recommend printing out and keeping around. I have a copy printed out because I'm constantly looking at it and better understanding exactly what are the tools that are out there. There's a lot of great information on this document. And so I'm gonna talk about, I believe, three treatment options that are possible throughout the season. This is a changing point. Oh, so powdered sugar, that was a good, thank you for asking, because that was supposed to be talked about in the talk. You can start a fight at a bee meeting about powdered sugar. It's not as of a itchy topic as queen excluders, of course, because that's the worst of them all. Powdered sugar, there's a larger margin for error, because if the humidity isn't the same, you're going to get a different reading because of that powder sugar is going to be holding together a little bit differently. So is it effective? Yes, it's effective if it's done extremely consistently. And I'm emphasizing that extreme because it's easy to mess up. I've seen at the state apiarist for Virginia is a strong component of the powdered sugar, or at least was 2 years ago when he was talking at an event, and he says that they're equal. Okay, and but in another case against it is those bees are still beat up. Like you still shook them around. If you put nothing in a jar and you just put the bees inside of a jar just with air and you shook that jar the way that you have to shake the jar, even with powdered sugar, you're going to hurt those bees. Are those bees going to live anyway? Is a good question. So I I urge people to do the alcohol wash so that when there is an issue, and if there's an issue, you can contact me and we will start to be able to compare apples to apples, because I'm doing the alcohol wash, and it's an industry standard. So no, you should not always expect to find low mites. You can sample 20 hives in an apiary, and you can find one with 20 varroa mites per 300 when all the other ones had 0. And now that 0 is simply should be said to be below detectable limits. Everybody has them, and a 0 in an alcohol wash means simply below detectable limits. So to expect or to assume with varroa mites, the only thing that you can expect is them not doing very well if you assume you don't need any intervention. So I just wouldn't get into the expecting and assuming kind of language, because that's dangerous business there. So I'm gonna go over Formic Pro really quickly here. Formic Pro is a newer formulation of Mite Away Quick Strips, and they're both made of formic acid. The mode of action, the way in which the formic acid is distributed and kills the varroa mites is that it's a fumigant. Seen here in the top right, you can see Evan applying Formic Pro onto his hive here. 2 patties for 10 days. Kind of, it smells sour. Smells like lime, lemons, and you're opening up the hive. You're putting the patties down, and you're closing them up, and that burns the varroa mites off of the bees. That's a good description of how it works, because one of the restrictions to Formic Pro, formic acid based chemicals, because Mite Away Quick Strips is also another product that they have, is that temperature. It's very temperature sensitive. So here circled is in the early spring, you'll have temperatures well below 80, and that's a time that Formic Pro could be used. I happen to actually use it in the summertime, so I actually already have my Formic Pro in stock. So in the summer, when I have a 3-day forecast, when it's below 80 degrees, I'm able to go out and apply my Formic Pro. And so temperature is a major restriction there, and but it has its advantage in the fact that it's you're allowed to have your honey supers on the bees while you're using this, whereas with Apivar, you're not allowed to have Formic Pro, honey supers on the hives. So you can see here, okay to use while storing honey, and that's a major advantage to Formic Pro. One of the questions: how often do you apply Formic Pro? 1 time per season. Yes, I do only have Formic Pro 1 time per season. I'm ready to use it more than that. I'm ready to use it on hives in April, because if I come out of winter with hive varroa mites, I'm going to use it in April. but I don't believe that there is a restriction on the label for the number of times you should use it for a season. The way that Apivar is restricted to 2 times per season. But I am only using it 1 per season. That's my mite management plan. And because of in late winter, I'm treating with Apivar. The first nice day in January, I put 1 strip of Apivar in each hive. You can see here in the top right, it's a small plastic strip that's put between the frames. So the bees crawl across that plastic strip that's impregnated with amitraz. Amitraz is the active ingredient with in Apivar. And it's extremely effective. So I think I have it zoomed in here. So effectiveness is up to 95%. If I don't think I had it circled there, but Formic Pro is 60 to 80%. That doesn't mean that Apivar is better than Formic. It just means that it's more effective. They work great in conjunction with each other. I'm treating with 2 different things at different times of year so that my varroa mites don't build a resilience against one chemical or the other. So yes, so the restriction, so you're limited to 1 time per year. So to emphasize, you want to be rotating other chemicals into your varroa mite management plan. And the other restriction is that you're unable to have your honey supers are on the hives while Apivar is in your hives. I believe that actually you have to wait 2 weeks. Yep. So you do not add supers in 2-week period following removal. So I want to add my honey supers on April 1st. So I need to take my Apivar out 2 weeks prior, and 56 days prior to that day, I'm putting the Apivar in. So all of my Apivar is in right now, in the hive. So you cannot have your honey supered within 8 weeks. That's a major restriction, which, because I understand that flow chart, that seasonal life cycle, I'm able to use this because I'm adding it 8 times a year. So there was a question in the chat here. It seems like the lower and deep supers, the honey is okay for bees, but not immediately for humans. No. So the word super is a place in which honey is stored for human consumption. So your honey supers are never on while Apivar is in the hives. Honey supers are for human consumption. So yes, supers are taken off before winter because all of the honey that is in the hive for winter is for the bees. So in me leaving a super on for the winter for the bees, that just automatically makes it so that it's not a super. It's simply a brood box with a lot of honey in it. And I want my brood boxes in wintertime to have as much as 60 pounds of honey. So no honey is ever consumed by humans that was in the same, was ever in the hive while Applevar was in the hive. So that word super versus brood box is an important thing to understand because of the jargon that's used in documents like this with the bee-informed partnership. Only colonies will not be supered within 8 weeks, as it says, meaning supered, meaning for honey consumption. I hope that answers your question.
I think
I-
I think the question was a little bit different. So the honey that's stored in the lower boxes, the non-supers, right? That's okay for bee consumption
Yes.
with the Apivar,
Yep.
but the honey wouldn't be okay for human consumption with the
Yes.
Apivar. Okay,
Yep.
that's kind of the question. Thank you.
Yeah, because you're not harvesting. You're never harvesting from a brood box, and it's even actually during this time of year, this black time of year, I'm using Apivar as they're going into winter, so that they go into winter, and the population is decreasing. You can kind of see that this yellow area is decreasing a bit. This time of year, I'm feeding my bees extensively sugar syrup, so to get them heavy for winter. So they're storing away a lot of honey, and that honey that they're going to consume, the bees are going to consume. This is a colony probably in January. This yellow box that you see is a full box of honey that they're consuming in late winter. Oxalic acid is another treatment. I tried to do these 3 very different types. Oxalic acid is very often confused with formic acid, just because they're both acids. They're both organic acids. And Apivar is a strip, but also it just so I'm picking these 3 because they're different, but they're also very often confused. Oxalic acid is also it kills the bees by contact. All right, so it is vaporized and kind of it's a hard crystal that is vaporized right at the entrance. See this metal pole that I'm holding with this heat component at the base here? Those crystals are turned into a gas and sprayed into the hive. It immediately cools down once it's in the hive and covers all of the bees inside of that hive. In covering the bees with the oxalic acid crystals, the mites that are on those bees die from that oxalic acid through contact. It is not effective while there's brood in the hive because that oxalic acid does not penetrate the wax cappings. So it's unable to kill any any mites that are underneath wax cappings. So that's why it's a winter treatment. In early January, and I'm using it in November when I'm taking my Apivar out, and in December when I'm just going Christmas shopping. Just when I'm just as like another time to hit them with that, hit the mites with that. This one you'll never see me do in person because there's an extreme safety concern. That oxalic acid, you vaporize and you pump into the hive, and then it crystallizes again. It goes back to the solid form and lands on the bees. That could happen inside of your lungs. And if you were to breathe in any of that vaporized oxalic acid, that part of your lung is now crystal and you will die. So major concern for this. It's popular, and but there's an extreme drawback there. It costs about 30 cents, if not less, to treat a colony with oxalic acid because that acid is so cheap. Whereas Apivar costs about $4, and people are drawn to it because of that inexpensiveness. But I kind of like, I'm in the business of scaring people with something that is so attractive because it's inexpensive, it's an organic acid, and it's somewhat very effective. It also could be very dangerous. So always read the label on also the chemicals. That's actually a very good point. Aside from the Being Forward partnership, the back of the chemical that you're using is, the label is law. So make sure you're following those labels to following those labels as if they are a tax form. And if you mess it up, you're going to be hit with a bill. They are extremely important. One, because they make it so that the chemical that you're using is effective in the first place. So yes, the advantage is that cleans adult bees. It cleans bees adults of mites during the broodless period. Those broodless periods are in about December, where we're broodless or nearly broodless. During those times, it's very effective, 82 to 99% effective. Go to questions. Oxalic is for this December or January. I use it in both. So I'm using it while in December and January. Do you take, all right, I read that one already. So I'm able to use oxalic acid about 3 times in the wintertime. Yeah, so I'm using oxalic acid about 3 times. The oxalic acid also could be administered through a water solution, a sugar water solution, and it's drizzled with a syringe or applicator onto the bees, or it could be vaporized. I use the vaporizing method just because that's what I chose. I think everybody should read the label, read the options, and make an informed decision based on what they've read and what they feel would fit them. I have a lot of bees here in Newton, New Jersey, where neighbors are not a problem. Whereas in Bergen County, I don't use oxalic acid because I'm not putting a respirator on the neighbor so that they're protected. I don't want some kid walking up to me and saying, "Oh, what are you doing?" And then like I'm wearing a respirator and that kid's not. Go through the Be Informed partnership and make informed decisions as to what you feel like your best options are based on where you. Somebody's not muted. If ever we can look at if they're muted or not, that'd be great. So Varroa. I have that resource on the resources for the new beekeeper on my website. and I welcome good conversation about the treatments on the Facebook group. If you don't want to put it on Facebook, you're welcome to email me questions about these things. Things that I don't know, I like to look up and to work through treatment options. A good note, there are a lot of not labeled, like off-labeled treatment options that people on YouTube and elsewhere will suggest to you. That's something that won't be tolerated on my Facebook group, as it could lead to issues in the way that, for the health of the person and the bees. So I think this is one of the assignments. Post onto the Facebook group about another Varroa treatment what do you think are the pros and cons? So go on to that Bee Informed Partnership, read it. And I only mentioned 3 of the about 20 different treatments. So, pick one and let's start a discussion about that option, that treatment. I'm gonna go to questions right here. Megan, I will write your name down. I did send out many invoices. What is the alcohol wash? What are the ratios? The alcohol wash is 100% alcohol. Some people do use windshield wiper fluid or soapy water. I don't like the suds and the foam that they make. So I do like to just use alcohol, rubbing alcohol. The most make you go blind, moonshine, or what, nail polish remover. That video that I will post into the chat once I leave screen share mode of Tim Schuler doing that alcohol wash, I will, he gives a really great description of what an alcohol wash exactly is. So the ratios is really just 100% alcohol. All right, so moving on from 2 other kinds of issues or diseases that you might face as a beekeeper. The 2 issues are first being an issue that arises because your bees are weak. And the other issue being something that is completely not Varroa related. So your bees are weak because of Varroa. Other issues will arise from that. We're going to cover that first. So you'll see oftentimes something called wax moths. Wax moths take advantage of unprotected equipment, and they eat beeswax. And in eating that beeswax, they make a mess of it. And if I were to pull into my apiary that I haven't looked at since August last year, it would look as if wax moth has killed all of those hives. But it was Varroa mites that killed the hives, and the wax moth took advantage of the unprotected equipment. The bees were protecting that equipment. The bees were protecting the beeswax. There's something called power moth. That could be, you put your beeswax into a plastic bag, and that power moth, sorry, I'm pronouncing that incorrectly, and you put that in with that plastic bag, and it keeps those moths away. Do make a note, there's a lot of other like mothballs to keep mice away from things is not the same as what to keep wax moths away from bee equipment. This is something that there is no supplement to buying it off of a bee supply website. A bee supply website is not going to be selling things to keep mice away from things. Well, at least keep mice away from things chemically. So make sure that you're buying the correct power moth. Something called hive beetles. It is a true beetle. Also something that takes advantage of weak colonies that are not protecting the honey that's in the hive. So if you have a colony that is dying from varroa mites and has a lot of honey in that hive, the hive beetles will go in there and ferment the honey. Also, something that could happen is you harvest your honey and you put it into your garage, and you think you're going to come back in 2 weeks and extract that honey from those frames. But hive beetles in that 2 weeks, because now it's unprotected equipment, have slimed up and fermented all of your honey. So bees are excellent protectors of equipment, and that's something that's very crucial in the fight against wax moths and hive beetles. Another issue so those are two pests. The cold being an issue that are associated with weak bees. So in the wintertime, especially this time of year, from I think it was our last talk when I was talking about equipment, you have here the hard-boiled egg analogy, where the blue is our brood area, the yellow is our honey that is stored. This time of year, we got a cold snap here. Right here, you can see that the entire brood area is touching honey. So that brood is not going to starve. Those nurse bees have honey nearby so that they're able to feed it. If those bees were parasitized by many varroa mites, they will start to die off throughout the winter, shrinking the overall size of that cluster. And then when we get a cold snap, the way that we're getting tonight, that cluster shrinks down, and it very well could shrink down so that it's not touching honey. Therefore, it could starve when there's 200 pounds of honey in the hive, because it's inches away from honey and it's cold, so they're unable to reach it. And that's an issue that arises because of weak bees from varroa mites. And that's why treating and monitoring in July affects your bees in March. I'm gonna go to the questions. Those Asiatic wasps are non-issue. The Asiatic wasps or the giant hornets or murder hornets, they're only in British Columbia and in Washington State right now. They're being monitored. You don't have those in New Jersey to worry about now. There are some other wasp species that will grab a bee or two. They're not going to grab enough of your bees to affect the population of your bees. So, and so you're not going to have enough of those European hornets eating bees that will affect the overall population. There's some birds that eat insects. So there's birds that will hang out near your bee yard and grab a couple bees from the air. Those birds are spectacular. in they're extremely beautiful animals. And they are also not going to affect the population of your overall honeybee colony. There's 60,000 bees in your colony, and they're going to only eat 10. So what I would say about those things that are grabbing individual bees is get a lawn chair and watch Mother Nature perform, because it's cool. Okay, yeah, they've been spotted in France. I'm sorry. I know that there's a that's why I said that there's, keeping bees in another continent is a totally different issue. But yeah, good luck. I don't know what to tell you. I don't want to deal with them. I do not look forward to the day that we have to deal with those wasps. Those are another fantastic animal. It was an extremely interesting article in one of the most recent American Bee journals talking about the communication with them. So it was like the pheromone communication is something that's being very studied. So I'm able to say that they're interesting because I don't have to deal with them. And those that are in New Jersey don't have to deal with them. So something that isn't Varroa related. I'm going to briefly touch upon this as it's getting late, and the next talk where we're talking about what's happening in the hive and reading the frames, these issues are detectable by looking at a frame of foul broods. So there's two different foul broods that exists in the world. There's European foul brood, shows up when bees have poor nutrition and or are affected with a bacteria. This is something that's prevented with good nutrition. Good nutrition meaning a good and plentiful pollen source throughout the season. This is something seen very often in pollination. Beekeepers that do pollination, meaning bring their bees into blueberries and then almonds and things like that, so that they're only exposed to a single pollen source. And I love going blueberry picking and eating blueberries for 2 meals in one day. But if I only was exposed to blueberries for a week, I would have a lot of nutrition issues. I'm going to have photos of the yellow colored brood and the spotty pattern that you'll be seeing. The American foul brood, this is something that a lot of beginner beekeeping classes stress over. We're going to talk about it in the next class. I'm going to show you photos. It's very rare. It's something that you call the state inspector, and you'll be able to, and they'll be able to come out and they'll to appropriately address the issue. If you actually do have American foul brood, the appropriate is if there's no cure to American foul brood. So euthanization of the colony is usually what happens. Something that is more common is chalk brood. Chalk brood is a fungus that happens sometimes in late spring when there's a cold snap and the population isn't large enough to keep all of the brood in the hive warm. So some of it chills. That chilled brood that is now dead that brood rots inside of the hive, and that rotting is fungus, and then that's chalk brood. It looks like little pieces of chalk are pushed into the frames. Again, this is something that I'm going to have good photos on, and this is really the topic of the next class, the reading the frames class, and we're going to be looking at all three of these issues and many more. So to address them, going to go to questions. If you haven't heard him already, he's been at my side, Mr. Hank, and he's our adjunct professor today. He will be answering questions. So yeah, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen, and I'm gonna go to questions. I'm gonna stop recording.